It's so nice to be with you all here today. As Pastor Nick said correctly, I am from Chicago. I am a former math teacher, and I did choose to serve Jesus after 6 months of just brutal classroom work. I couldn't take it. This is so much easier. This is so much easier than that. Now, I was born in the 90s, and for a kid in the 90s, there was some pretty great stuff. But one of those things had its 20th anniversary this week. And if you were maybe paying attention to politics or something else, you might have missed it. But I'm a movie lover, and this week was the 20th anniversary of perhaps the greatest documentary of all time. It's the documentary that captures the classic basketball confrontation between the Monstars and the Toon Squad. I'm, of course, talking about the 1996 classic Space Jam, which was the movie of my youth. Bill Murray, Michael Jordan, Bugs Bunny on screen together. Nothing in this world is better than that. That's a promise. I watched it again this week, and it's true. There still is nothing better than all of those things together. It's just a fantastic movie. Now, as a kid growing up in Chicago, Michael Jordan was it. I mean, really. Michael Jordan was the pinnacle of everything you could ascribe and hope to be. And for one kind of brief moment there in the 90s, not only was he a basketball legend, he also was the star player for my favorite sports team, the Chicago White Sox. But he was also a blockbuster movie star, all rolled into one. And it doesn't get better than that. We live in a culture that kind of puts athletes and movie stars and musicians in a separate category. We lift them up on a pedestal. They're set apart as examples for us. And we could argue whether or not they're positive or negative examples. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. And I thought, man, these people are kind of like kings. And you think to yourself, why would he think something so random? It's because if you were paying attention this morning, and I'm not sure if it says it in the bulletin, but it definitely did on the screens, today is Christ the King Sunday. Christ the King Sunday. Now, luckily, we live in a country that doesn't really have a concept of a king. But at least when I think of kings, I think of really gaudy crowns, maybe fairy tale Disney type characters, okay? Everything is just really fancy and ostentatious. This is a great picture. I just saw this. It's that exact image. And I think when we hear that it's Christ the King Sunday, we want to roll out the red carpet for Jesus. We want to do that same kind of stuff. We want to make sure that Jesus gets the all-star treatment. And why not? Why not? We've got some pretty epic images of Jesus. I'm talking Easter Jesus. The stone has been rolled away. That's great stuff. Jesus sitting at the right hand of the Father. I just see him in a white robe, just chilling. Right? That is great, kingly, triumphant Jesus. And then I've got that movie-ending Jesus, at least that I imagine, kind of floating off into heaven on a cloud, waving into the sunset. Roll credits. That is just perfect. That is the best Jesus. That is the kingly Jesus that we want to talk about today. But if you listen to the gospel reading, that is not the Jesus we get for today, is it? We get crucified Jesus, vulnerable, dying Jesus. We've got criminals on the left and the right, and people watching him just to watch him die. That's the only reason they were there. Unbelievable. There are so many stories from the Bible. There's so many that would be more suited, in my mind, for Christ the King Sunday. And apparently my memo to the lectionary people didn't get there in time because I wanted that Hollywood ending today. I did. But what we get instead is kind of a cold, hard taste of reality. This is what life was like for Jesus and his followers. This is what it was like. Dying on a cross, being mocked and scoffed and fed sour wine. It's true. It's true. See, Jesus is an enemy of the state. He was. He went against everything that the Roman Empire stood for. And there wasn't like free speech back then, so it was just easier to shut him up. And they didn't want to shut him up just kind of quietly. They did it very publicly. They crucified him. That's a criminal's death. They hung him there next to criminals. They mocked him. That's the King of the Jews. They tested him. They tortured him. They spat on him. So I've got to ask, why, oh why, is this the text for Christ the King Sunday? Because it's not working out in my mind. I hear Christ the King, and I think the choir is going to be singing, "Oh, Happy Day," and there's going to be cake after church. Now, I didn't know there was going to be pie after church today, so that joke doesn't really make sense. But it kind of does. It kind of does. Because that's the Jesus, that's the Christ the King Sunday we want. We want pie afterwards. We want it to be fancy and regal. But we get this reading and it's difficult. It's challenging to the point where many churches skip Christ the King Sunday. I emailed Pastor Nick earlier this week, and the first question I asked him are, one, are you doing Christ the King Sunday? They skip it. They don't like this reading. It's a bummer with Thanksgiving coming up. We don't want to talk about it. They kind of skip right to Advent and get a jump on Christmas. And then there are people that could care less about the reading, but they have a problem with calling Christ the King. They have a problem with this glorious, triumphant, kingly language for Jesus, because Jesus wasn't like that. We get a little squirmy as Lutherans, at least in seminary. People get squirmy when we hear Christ the King. We don't want to touch it. It's too sticky. It's because we start thinking about Jesus in the same way I thought about Michael Jordan when I was a kid, and still do to this day. And we get worried that we're going to get trapped in this, it's called a theology of glory. Oh, everyone shudders. Everyone shudders. That's where we think Christianity is tops. Number one, that we're better than others, that Jesus is better, that triumphant, angry, kingly Jesus makes us better. It gets kind of close to works righteousness, and that's when the room of Lutherans tenses up. We don't want to be anywhere near that Jesus. We kind of think that Jesus is the way to material and personal wealth. I'm talking about the people that are on TV at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. This is the kind of Jesus we want to stay away from on Christ the King Sunday. And when we name our fears and insecurities and our confusion and our questions about this Sunday, it hit me. This is exactly why we need this reading for today. Jesus was unlike any king we have ever seen, we have ever thought of, and we're likely ever to see again. He hung out with criminals, with the least among us, with the outcasts. He healed lepers. He rode triumphant into Jerusalem, only to be captured and killed. Not very kingly. But that's Christ, our King, the one who defies all human wisdom and understanding, the one who refocuses us on the true meaning of God's power. That through him, God reconciles all things to us, to you and me, to both of us, to everybody in this room on earth and in heaven. Christ, our King, died the death of a traitor so that our salvation would be found not in glory, but on a cross. And that's our King. And today we celebrate and remember that moment when he took all of our insecurities, our sins, our brokenness onto his shoulders and died that we might live, so that we would be made whole. And so we're not worried anymore about this reading being too sticky. We don't care. And we're not afraid of using language that's kingly and glorious and triumphant, because Christ is our King. And today we're going to proclaim and sing out that our life is not from glory, but it's from that cross. And Jesus is no less worthy of being our King just because he had a beard and walked in sandals. Let us never forget what it is that God has done for us. Let us never forget that on this Christ the King Sunday, that wealth and fame and power were never things that our King sought, never things that he ascribed to. Let us never forget that the only crown Jesus ever wore was made of thorns. And that's what today is all about. That's what Christ the King Sunday is all about. It's about us no longer living in fear of sin and death, because they are no more. It's about us finally living into that hope and love that surrounds us every day. And we can say that because of what happened long ago on a cross. What happens every day when we live our lives of faith. And it's what we can proclaim every day until that kingdom comes and we're reunited again in paradise. Until then, we'll adore him and we'll sing triumph and all of these coronation songs evermore. And then next week, we get to go back to the beginning of the story. We get to go back to a lowly manger because there was no more room in the inn. And there, in humble majesty, is Christ our King, our hope and our joy. And I will proudly and gladly follow him and serve him all the days of my life. Because on that day long ago that we hear about today, hanging on a cross next to two criminals, God's grace and love won the ultimate victory. To Christ, our King, who came not to rule, but to serve. To the Lord of Lords, who died so that we might live. To heaven's eternal light, who is with us now and always, be glory and power and dominion forever and ever and ever and ever.